Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this important topic. But before I talk about school safety, let me indicate that we did receive the revenue report for the end of the fiscal year, and I'm delighted that we have a $41.7 million surplus which our revenues exceeded our forecast. And so that is good news, and it reflects the job growth that we've had in the state of Arkansas, as well as the growth in our retail sector. If you go back to last March, after we saw the tragic shooting at the Parkland School in Florida, I signed an executive order that created the School Safety Commission, and Dr. Cheryl May I asked her to be chairman of it, Bill Temple, vice chairman of it, and we have the commissioners here that have served dutifully on that important School Safety Commission, and they was asked to make a preliminary report by July 1 with a final report later this fall, later in the year. The commission has met 9 times. They formed 5 subcommittees. They visited schools and heard presentations of subject matter experts over the last 3 months. The result is that they have presented me with a report. And Dr. May, thank you for the presentation and for this exhaustive preliminary report that includes 19 specific recommendations, and I believe an executive summary has been provided to the members of the media. These 19 recommendations can be broken down into 3 different categories. Some of the recommendations simply require action by the school districts to implement, because one of the principles that the commission followed was not to overly mandate local school districts, and recognizing the unique environment of each school district and each school and campus in terms of physical safety and the requirements for security and the culture of the community as well. But there's recommendations that the local school districts can implement immediately. That's one category. The other category is action items that will be required for a closer review by the Arkansas Department of Education. And Commissioner Key is here, not a part of the School Safety Commission, but his team was an integral part of it. But this is going to require a more exhaustive review by the Department of Education to see what further steps need to be taken to see that these recommendations are implemented. The third category of recommendations are those that might require legislative action or support. And I look forward to working with the members of General Assembly to study these recommendations and see which ones will require legislative action next year. I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to review a few specific items or recommendations that have been made, and then talk about some action steps that we will take and turn it open for questions. One of the first areas of recommendations is that no campus should ever be without armed presence when staff and children are present. Currently, 68% of our 238 school districts are covered by armed security presence, but our school resource officers are the primary resource that's being applied, and the commission found that this has increased. The number of SROs have increased by 92 in the last 5 years. But we need to expand the availability of school resource officers so that the campuses can be protected. And then we also, when school resource officers are not available, be able to look at options for the schools as to how to have an armed presence when needed. And that option has already been passed by law called the Commission School Security Officers. The Commission recommended additional requirements to be met for Commission School Security Officers, which is emulating the model program in Clarksville, which requires standard psychological exams, random drug screening, and emergency response technician members to train with local law enforcement. And so that is something that I believe the school districts will continue to look at as an option when school resource officers are not available or not affordable in the broad and expansive area that the Commission believes is necessary. Let me underscore the point that teachers should never be required to carry a firearm. They can become a commissioned school security officer if it is their choice, or other personnel at the school, but it should never be required of a teacher. The first response is school resource officers, and then as we expand these initiatives, commissioned school security officers with enhanced training is an option that has to be considered by the school districts as well. I like the recommendation that was made that said schools should increase officer traffic and visibility on campuses, where Bentonville and Benton are models where a police officer might go by the school and a room's available where they can fill out a report. So they're carrying out their normal activities as police officers, but they're increasing their presence on campus and the familiarity with that armed presence on campus during the course of the day. It was recommended that all districts should be required to form district safety and security teams and designate one current staff member as a school safety coordinator. This is a good recommendation that needs to be implemented. It is utilizing existing resources, but giving a point of contact and a point of responsibility for school safety coordinators. This will help local law enforcement, it will help the Department of Education to oversee, to coordinate and make sure the school safety requirements are being carried out. Another recommendation that follows along with the school safety coordinator is that a comprehensive school safety assessment should be required to be conducted every 3 years. Right now, there's not the specificity on the assessments and the completeness of the review that is required. The assessments, as recommended, should be verified to the Department of Education, which is a new addition, where they can make sure that the assessments are conducted by the district safety and security teams. They're filed with the Department of Education, so there's some visibility at the state level for the security plans. And then let me focus on another area of recommendations that's very important. It's going to lead to some specific action items. And this is the area of student access to mental health services, and these need to be enhanced. I hearken back to my time with the National School Safety Initiative as we've studied school incidents. Not all, but many are accompanied by incidences of mental health issues, and it's important that in our schools that you have mental health counselors that are available for the students. It is important that mental health counselors coordinate with threat assessment groups to identify threats and coordinate with law enforcement. It's been mentioned that school climate surveys have been conducted by Watson Chapel that's been successful, but we have to increase that student access to mental health services. And school counselors are part of this and should be available to provide mental health counseling to the students. It's recommended that each school district establish a behavioral threat assessment team and process for evaluation of those threats, and that school districts should have a means to allow anonymous reporting of suspicious activity and behavior. This is not an all-inclusive discussion of the 19 recommendations that have been made, but it highlights a few of those that I believe are exceptionally important and that requires follow-up action. Let me hone in on the school counseling needs that we have in Arkansas. The Public School Student Services Act was passed in 1991 that establish requirements for school counselors, including guidance and counseling service, psychological services, health services, group conflict resolution, and it includes career services. The law requires counselors to spend at least 75% of the work time providing direct counseling to students and no more than 25% of work time on administrative duties. That is out of balance in our schools, where our school counselors are spending less time on real counseling needs of the students and more time on administrative work and activities. And so because of this lack of balance and the lack of insufficient availability of true counseling service for the students, and based upon the recommendations of the Safety Commission, I'm directing Commissioner Key and the Department of Education to review that law and to work with the General Assembly to amend the law to improve the availability of school counselors to provide direct counseling services for our students, and to improve and increase the coordination between schools and state agencies that provide mental health services and resources for specific student needs. You can have the school counselor provide a certain level of counseling and mental health services, but many times they're more acute needs that need to be directed to state agencies for support. And then to look at filling the gaps for mental health services when the students have greater needs or more needs are identified in the school district. And so, Commissioner Key, I look forward to your work in that regard. And Dr. May, I know that the Commission and Commission members have a lot more work to do because you have your follow-up report. When's it due?
November 30th, sir.
I know, I think I said something like this fall and I got a little bit of a look from you. So November 30th. So this is really a key element. And the reason we wanted it by July 1 is to provide these recommendations to our school districts before the school session starts next year. And for us also to work on it as we lead into the next session of the General Assembly. So with that, I'll be happy to turn it open for any questions you might have. Yes?
What's the approximate cost of implementing these procedures?
There's not any direct cost associated right now. For example, the school safety coordinator, that is taking an existing school personnel and asking them to take on that responsibility. The school safety team would be comprised of existing school personnel, so those don't require additional resources. I think the additional resources you have to look at would be on the school resource officers and on, well, that's where it would be, the school resource officers. And that has historically been shared by the school districts and local law enforcement, sharing those responsibilities. And so as I've met with the Municipal League, I've asked them to take on more responsibility for funding through local police, additional school resource officers for the schools. The counties need to step up as well. And so that is an encouragement for them, and those are district by district funding needs. Some of the poorer districts or others might choose to go the route of the commissioned school safety officers that don't require additional funding except for training requirements. And I have provided some additional funding for the Criminal Justice Institute to carry out additional training of our school resource officers. The final element of cost would be what we're looking at in terms of assistance on additional services on mental health side. The school counselors need to be doing their work in terms of mental health services and following the existing law and with the changes that we're going to be suggesting to the legislature. But we will look at whether there's additional resources that need to be supplied from a state standpoint to aid in those services.
Governor, you just mentioned the surplus. I know Representative Baltz is working on a bill to require resource officers in every school and has toyed with the idea or discussed using state surplus to give districts who wouldn't be able to afford a resource officer on every campus. Is that something that you agree with or support? Or?
Well, I agree with the intent, which is to have school resource officers and armed protection for students and staff at schools. That's the intent of it. But the rainy day funds, discretionary funds are one-time funds. These are ongoing needs of schools, and so I don't believe that's a good solution to have one-time funds for ongoing needs. And that's why, first of all, we're trying to resist the heavy-handed mandates from the state. We're giving recommendations to school districts to implement that will be supplemented by statewide coordination. But we're looking for our school districts and our local municipal police organizations and counties to help pick up that load on the school resource officers.
As you have more of these resource officers across the state, especially in smaller school districts where you might not already have disciplinary or unarmed security guards, how do you ensure that they're going to be spending bulk or all their time on student safety and not getting involved in more minor disciplinary issues like enforcing truancy or even a student back talking to a teacher? I mean, where's the line? Do we need any safeguards for that?
Well, first, in terms of school resource officers, that's one of the recommendations that's very, very appropriate, that each school district have a memorandum of understanding, an agreement with the law enforcement agency as to what the parameters of the school resource officers will be, and what are their guidelines for an offense being a disciplinary action handled by the school versus a law enforcement action handled by police. That memorandum of understanding is very important, and I know that one of the tasks that Dr. Mays identified for the Commission is to develop a model MOU for the school districts that can use, and so that's one of their projects between now and November 30th. In terms of the commissioned officers, that really should be easy because they are operating within the school environment itself. And so I don't know that that would be a complicating factor there.
With no mandate, what's the promise that this will actually come to fruition?
Say it again.
With no mandate on some of the optional recommendations, what's the promise that this will actually make a difference?
Well, there will be some mandates. For example, there is a requirement recommended that the school assessments, school security assessments, be filed with the Department of Education. There is many recommendations that could lead to mandates, and that's one of the things that our Commissioner of Education will be looking at on the recommendations and talking to our school administrators and say, is this something that you can manage? Is this something that can be supported in terms of a mandate? We're looking at the cost of it as well as the effectiveness of it, and also what leadership the local school districts will provide. And the reason you don't want to have very specific mandates is because the school districts are unique to themselves in terms of their physical capabilities, as I said, the culture. And so we want mandates to require assessments. We don't want mandates to tell them how high the fence should be built or what kind of surveillance should be conducted or what kind of armed security should be present. So you've got to distinguish those two different kinds of mandates. And I think as you see as we go on, for example, the mental health, there is a mandate that our school counselors be engaged in mental health services and not administrative duties. That's one that has not had any teeth and has been not applied appropriately, and so we want to correct that. I wanted to invite Dr. May, if you, on behalf of the Commission, want to have any remarks to say. You've worked very hard.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning. Let me first of all, and very importantly, thank the Governor for his leadership on this extremely important issue. But secondly, the other thing that I wanted to say is that the folks that are here, our Commission members, have really done an extraordinary job for the kids of our state. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that these individuals have a passion and they inspire me because they are so concerned about our kids. And I would also be remiss if I didn't thank Commissioner Key for the tremendous support that his staff, primarily Doug Bradbury, have provided our commission. We could not have made the progress that we have without you, sir, so thank you very much.
And I asked Commissioner Key to look over the report, as I had a draft of it, and he has digested it, and gone over some of these action items with him and asked him to make a comment.
Thank you, Governor. I would just say that this report and the work of this commission has really, they struck a balance between things that are, you could classify as preventive, when we talk about increasing mental health services for our students. That's very much in the vein of prevention. You look at the mitigation, things that we can do through facilities, through the structures, through hardening those facilities to mitigate should a violent incident occur. And then finally, just the reaction, that if it does occur, what do we have, what assets do we have on campus to be able to react appropriately, quickly, and to provide that level of safety that we all expect. So I commend the Commission's work. I also thank Doug, thank Mr. Montgomery from the Division of Facilities, and also Don Kamenar with our office for the work that they've done and support they've provided to this effort.
Governor, are you saying that 75-25 isn't being complied with, there needs to be more teeth, or that there needs to be a different ratio?
It's not being complied with, and there hasn't been any teeth. It's just been, that's why I described it as out of balance. I've talked to enough school counselors, I've talked to enough principals, and talked to enough students, and the school counselors are having to do a lot of administrative work. And I think that was one of the findings of the commission. So it's not just me. This is one of the findings of the commission. And so this is one of those old laws that we've got sidetracked on the mission of school counselors, and we need to get back on track. And if you'll remember, what was it, within the last 2 weeks, there was this survey that was done of our schools that found us in a terrible position in terms of the students that had been exposed to risky behavior, and so that points up the need for school counseling for a broader range of mental health services. So I just see this as one of the key points that we need to get back on track. And we will, Commissioner Key will be looking at from the standpoint of what kind of legislation that we need to make sure this is effective, but then secondly, looking at the funding side on school counseling and services.
Governor, if the recommendation is for all the school districts to have an SRO, but the ones that can't afford them should use CSSOs, is there any concern that CSSOs will be less effective or like just not as reliable as an SRO?
Well, that's a matter of experience and judgment, and I think that I'm very proud of those school districts that have implemented the commission security officers, and they've had success. It's worked well. It hasn't had the cost associated with school resource officers, and there's probably a significant amount of continuity. I'll just, like school resource officers, that's up to who the police chief decides to assign to the school. And so they could be there for 6 months and gone. They might go through the training and then they rotate out and go back out on the street. And so you've got to learn and have experience with both those models and what works well for your school. Now, the advantage of school resource officers is that they are law enforcement, and they've had very specific training in a broader range of law enforcement activities, and so parents feel very comfortable with them, and students do as well. And so there's a broader education and cultural change to go to commission's security officers. So I'm not expressing a preference one over the other. I think it's clear that the recommendation is a school campus with staff and students need to have armed protection and layered protection. And that goes to the important points of what happened in Benton and Bentonville with their layered protection. and really a response to some inactive layered protection in some of the instances that we've seen.
So for parents and teachers who are, since there has been a lot of concern during the public comment period, we heard a lot of concern from teachers, parents, a bunch of people saying that they didn't want more armed presence, but that is definitely more of a mandate, right, than just a recommendation. I mean, we are saying here that there should be a higher armed presence on all campuses.
There should be at least one armed presence on campuses in Arkansas, on school campuses. And I think the concern is that there's so much expression of emotion about teachers being armed. And that's why I underscored the point, there's nothing in the recommendations and nothing in my philosophy that would mandate that. Teachers should never be required to carry a firearm. And I think that's what the public is responding to, and I think they have a high level of confidence in school resource officers, and that increased armed presence. So I think they support that, and I think the polls and the information we have supports that. Y'all are good to give us attention. Let me assure the public and each of you that there's not a more important assignment that we have than to protect our school children and to make sure that our schools are safe and that parents are comfortable in dropping off their kids to school in a safe environment. And we will do everything that we can to make sure that is accomplished. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry you all were staying there so long. Well done. Well done. What was that?